Hey everybody, we are the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. I'm Dr. Erin.
I am Dr. Kristen.
And we're here with a hot-ish take, which we haven't done in Lord knows how long. And today we're going to be sharing our thoughts on a new documentary that dropped on Netflix at the end of June called Athlete A. So you can consider this hot-ish take a follow-up to our hot-ish take about the sexual abuse scandal that rocked USA Gymnastics. At least 4 years ago was when the story dropped. 2 years ago was the trial of Larry Nassar, who was convicted of sexual assault against, I think, 300 women at the time, over 300, and also charges of child pornography. We now know, thanks to this documentary, that upwards of 500 women have come forward. But this documentary, Athlete A, tells the story predominantly of three gymnasts who were assaulted by Larry Nassar: Maggie Nichols, Rachel Denhollander, and Jamie Dancher. Sorry if I
Dancher, yep.
Dancher. And it also, so they feature prominently as voices of girls who were abused. And then Maggie Nichols' parents as well talk and provide some context. And then we get the stories from the reporters at the Indianapolis Star, who did this investigative reporting and were the ones to break the story in 2016. And we also get to hear from the sexual assault investigator and the prosecutor against Larry Nassar become characters kind of later on and share their voices. So similarly to other documentaries about abuse and violence against humans and children, most, I think, similarities for me came thinking about Leaving Neverland, which is the story of the alleged, do I still have to say alleged? I think I do, because he was never convicted.
Legally, yeah, he was never convicted. Yep.
Alleged abuse of Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson.
Michael Jackson alleged abuse of young boys at the Neverland Ranch. So yeah, we have some thoughts about this one. We learned that Maggie Nichols was listed as Athlete A in all the documents from USA Gymnastics, the USOC, and the FBI. And that's where the title of the documentary comes from. So yeah, we've got about 5 or 6 things we'd like to cover that happened in this documentary. I will hit the ball to your side of the court, Dr. Kristen, with whatever you would like to talk about first.
There's a theme in the history of humans of institutions protecting themselves over the protection of individuals. And it seems whenever this happens, we're a little bit surprised somehow.
Yeah.
And a little bit taken aback. And I don't know if that's because as people, we naturally assign our personal ethic to the institutions that we belong to or the institutions that we affirm. But it is very clear that the instinct of an institution is to protect itself. For anyone who has not joined us before, I both my master's degrees from Baylor University, which was rocked by our own sexual assault scandal, not about 5 years after I finished my second master's there. And one of the hardest things for me personally was believing that the football team was more important than the lives of these women. Yeah. And that the name of Baylor was more important than the lives of the students who reported, especially based on the narrative that Baylor gave me, that it was a family, that we were especially of faith, that all of those kind of things. And I thought about that a lot in this documentary as we talked about what USA Gymnastics was to the United States. And how I grew up watching Olympians, for sure, and believing. My first cognitive Olympic memory is 92 in Barcelona.
Yeah.
I was alive for the 88 ones. I was 5.
I remember Barcelona. Like we got shirts and
Same. We applied for tickets to Atlanta. Like we almost went as a family. I mean, like I was a swimmer growing up, so was my brother. So like Janet Evans was one of my heroes. I had a framed picture of her in my room for a long time.
Yeah.
Me, like, and I think for you too, the
100%.
narrative, especially we sell to children, is that these are the best of us.
Yeah, and like interestingly, like uniquely, my experience too. The headquarters for the U.S. Olympic Committee is in my hometown of Colorado Springs, and so we have a huge Olympic training center that we built in the '90s. And there was a large interaction in my young life with Olympic athletes, even just going to see them. Like the volleyball team would hold exhibition games, or we could go see swimming trials or whatever. So it was an active part of my childhood was going and seeing Olympic athletes, which was awesome, and I was super privileged to get to do. So yeah, and definitely we're of the same age that like watching the dream teams of the 90s and all of that. I was a huge fan of Bonnie Blair, and like my dad got her autograph for me because I loved I loved skating and competitive skating, and my dad was a swimmer. So yeah, it was. And I think just when you said something, I want to say really quickly about why we believe institutions aren't the way that they are. And, you know, USA Gymnastics is a big one. Universities that have covered up abuse scandals, obviously the Catholic Church that we know about in recent years. I think it's when we see some of our personal values reflected in that institution that we want to believe that they are like more like us. So with the Catholic Church, if you believed that that was a part of your faith, or that people of faith should behave a certain way, I think then you would think the institution based on that faith would do that. And like USA Olympics is like our values as a nation, right?
Yeah.
And so I think, you know, all of the nationalism that we have, that we believe about what it means to be an American, we see that represented in the USOC teams.
Yeah, so our American exceptionalism is done in that. The medal count we do all the time. I think a lot of people that talk about these are sports I never watch except during the Olympics, and I love the human interest piece. We celebrate people that overcame adversity. We don't ever talk about how much money it takes to become an elite athlete. We don't ever talk about the class privilege. We don't talk about the racial privilege in some sports, and all sports, I'm sure.
Yeah.
We just really focus for 2 weeks as a nation on all the things we are proud about ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I joke all the time. The only time I am patriotic and jingoistic is during the World Cup and the Olympics.
Yeah, no, same. And I think that's one of the really interesting things that Kristen and I found when talking about this offline before deciding what our hot-ish take would be about. Kind of the intersection of all these different ideas in what a culture looks like. And we talk about culture all the time here at Abbey Research. And so we thought this was a great opportunity to unpack that, because it seems like we talk about it like it's a simple thing. Oh, this is American culture. Oh, this is sports culture, gymnastics culture, whatever. But there's so many things that went into the culture of USA Gymnastics. And a huge part of that is American nationalism. A huge part of that is the Cold War, which I had never thought about before, and this like hyper competitiveness with Soviet states, and the Karolis defecting from Romania after Nadia Comaneci won the gold medal for Romania to come here and implement the Romanian coaching style, which was so toxic for these girls. But that, like, this documentary helped me kind of see that in a different light. And I was like, oh, because I remember watching Carrie Strug thinking, this is what it means to be a super competitive athlete. And look at her dedication and look at her bravery. And it was Jamie Dancer who said, like, she was watching it. Or no, it wasn't Jamie.
No, it wasn't Jamie. It was somebody from the 88 team.
It was somebody from the 80s, one of the 80s teams, who was watching it and saying, like, I looked at her and I didn't see a hero. I saw abuse. And I was like, that was such a light switch flip in my head. But that's a huge part of this, understanding this documentary and understanding why this institution protected itself, and why we had no idea. We had no idea what was being done to these girls.
So there's a couple things here that from a leadership perspective, we'd like to talk about. First of all, from top-down leadership, I really appreciated that the Indianapolis Star kept saying over and over again, we're not going for Nasser. We're here for USA Gymnastics. We're here for everybody, which meant that they relentlessly went after Steve Penny, who is the former, and as far as I know, he has still not been convicted of anything. I think we're still awaiting trial on him. I could be wrong.
But if COVID might have
delayed some things. I'm not sure.
He was arrested in 2018 though,
he was arrested in 2018. Actually, I'm going to Google that really quick while we're talking.
Yeah.
But
one of the more evil people
when you think about, where is Steve Penny now after Larry Nasser? Thank you, Oxygen. I would love to know.
Thanks, Google.
What is really, so there's a couple things that are really disgusting about his behavior. Off the top of my head. But two things very in particular. One, USA Gymnastics made the decision to appoint at a very key time in its history, to appoint somebody with a marketing degree and a marketing mindset to being their president. Now, if you've not really thought about what it means to be an organizational president, really quickly, just want to unpack that. It means seeing the entire organization all the time. It means understanding marketing and PR for sure, but also employee relations, HR management. Being a president is very difficult because you have to hold all of these things in you all the time. So one of the things we noticed from Steve Penny is that he never held HR or really even the finances all that carefully, or the ethics statements, any of that. What he held very, very carefully and very wholly was the marketing and the image.
Yeah, and we also meet the former president, right, who was president in the 90s, who was also marketing.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a pattern within USA Olympics or USA Gymnastics, that they kept hiring brand-minded presidents to build this product of USA Gymnastics in line with the way the Carolis were treating the girls as coaches as well.
Yeah. So he was arrested in October of 2018. He was freed on a $20,000 bond. His attorney claims he didn't know about the abuse, which, forgive my language, is utter bullshit. He is still facing tampering with evidence charges.
Yes. Yeah. That's what that was.
So, but we do know he knew about the abuse. This is just giving me all sorts of Baylor and Art Briles flashbacks. We do know he knew about the abuse because Maggie Nichols reported it in 2015.
Yeah.
And Steve Penny told her parents that it was being taken care of. Mm-hmm. And that he had gone to the FBI. But what we now know is that at the same time, he was offering people in the FBI jobs at USA Gymnastics because he wanted to cultivate a close relationship between USA Gymnastics and law enforcement. And I don't mean to be a conspiracy theorist, but if you are running an organization that is not doing anything criminal and is really just training children to flip around a floor to get medals, explain to me why you need good relationships with law enforcement.
Not just law enforcement, the FBI.
The FBI.
Like, not just the local police in Colorado Springs or wherever.
Or in Indianapolis, which is where their headquarters are.
Yes, USA Gymnastics in Indianapolis, yeah. Like, not just the local or state police, the FBI.
The FBI.
And we also know from this documentary that he did eventually report it to the FBI, but that the FBI sat on it for 16 months before they started an investigation. So there's a lot of institutional culpability.
Yeah, because what we also, so if we want to talk about the Nasser piece of this in particular, Michigan State University had reports on him being a sexual predator for nigh on a decade.
I think it was 1997 was the first report.
Was the first one. So we think about all this, and then as part of the culture we want to talk about too, we often, by colleagues and some other people, get accused of making everything about gender, to which we say, because everything is about gender.
Everything is about gender.
And in this particular case, it specifically is, because you don't really, I mean, like, I'm sure that I'm waiting for a sexual assault scandal in men's gymnastics, like, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But
I mean, we had one in the
Not at the same time
recently.
I don't know, but what I do know is that we as an American culture do not value the lives of women and girls on the same level as we value the lives of white men. These little girls were products to Penny, the way he speaks about them, the way that he very clearly, I mean, the Karolis, they were products, they were not human beings.
Yeah.
And they
That's
even
the
speak about
Romanian
that.
model.
Yeah, that was the Romanian model. That was how the Romanians won Olympics. You did not treat them like humans. You treated them like robots.
Like robots, yeah.
And so because women and girls are routinely not believed, predators like Nasser, like Jerry Sandusky, like any number of priests. We also learned that Nasser isn't really even the problem in USA Gymnastics originally, but that the start of this story from the Indianapolis Star was that they found instances of coaches who were kicked out of one gym for being abusive and moved to another, much like Catholic priests were.
Yeah.
And Southern Baptist pastors and lots of people, because we very, especially in terms of sexual assault, part of American exceptionalism and American culture is that we privilege the narratives and the reputation of men over the lived experiences of women and girls.
Yeah.
And so people were you hear it all the time. The minute somebody started sniffing around Nasser, people would be like, do you have any idea what you're going to do to his reputation?
Yeah, and he said that too when he was brought in by the investigator. You could ruin my reputation.
I'm very, very sorry.
I'm not at all sorry. Yeah, and I think one of the things that it's kind of this perfect storm in this situation, right? With the Karolis bringing their method of making products, robots, gymnast robots instead of human beings. They also talk about in the documentary the shift in women's gymnastics from women to girls, and the fetishization of being childlike or looking childlike that happened with Nadia Comaneci, and then in the American system, Mary Lou Retton, that then all of a sudden the younger you were, the more desirable you were. And so they started recruiting younger and younger and putting girls in this system. And all of that combined with the Karolis' like system of control and abuse and silencing left this huge opening for a predator. And I think for me, the scariest example of that was when one of the investigative reporters said, Larry Nasser was everything the Karolis were not. He was the only nice adult in that system. And I had to pause the documentary and sit with that. So it's not just Larry Nasser and his predatory abuse. He was allowed to infiltrate that system and flourish in it because these girls were already being controlled and abused.
There is a lot of, things we have learned about children's brains in the last 30 years. And one of them is that we as humans have this stuff called neuroplasticity. For the first decade or so of our lives, where our brains are literally still forming, and the muscle itself may not be forming, but the neural pathways and the emotions we connect with events and things like that are still there is still neuroplasticity throughout the rest of your life, but your brain calcifies. That's why learning languages is harder at 40 than it is at 10.
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing. So if these girls at ages 6, 7, 8, and 9 were introduced into shame spirals of what their body looked like, that they were never good enough, they didn't fly high enough, they weren't strong enough, I'm sure they were all yelled at to never cry, that you performed on broken bones, that you did all of that.
Yeah, suck it up culture.
It's very different when I hear stories of collegiate athletes making decisions to play on broken bones than when I hear stories of 13-year-old girls vaulting in the Olympics on shattered spines. And if that is not something that you agree with, I would really love to hear why. Because we say as a culture that we want to protect our children.
Yeah.
And yet we agree that a child can make a decision about their body in no other circumstance than in this one.
Yeah.
And so there's just a lot I'm really confused about in regards to that and why that broke down. the final thing I'd like to bring up personally is the importance of having diverse voices in different places. So I want to not say, I am not someone to say that we need women everywhere because women are great. Maggie Nichols reported this to her female coach, who, to my understanding, was a mandatory reporter and did not report to the police.
No, and
trusted her system.
Reported it to the head of women's gymnastics, who was a woman and a mandatory reporter.
Who also did not report it to the police.
Nope.
And went to, now, reporting to the police does not mean that these girls would have been saved or anything else. But there are two things that you are supposed to do when you are in charge of children. You are supposed to report any allegations of abuse, and you are supposed to protect the child. Yep. I am a mandatory reporter as a social worker. I've been a mandatory reporter as a youth worker. I've been a mandatory reporter in a lot of hats. And I will tell you, the minute, I've only had to mandatory report once, and the literal second that child told me she didn't feel safe in her home, it was my first phone call.
Yeah.
I didn't hesitate. I didn't care about her parents' reputation. I didn't care.
And so what kind of culture is it where these people are aware of their requirement as mandatory reporters and their instinct is to protect the institution?
And my question is, if they're not mandatory reporters, if that's not part of the whatever, so maybe in Colorado, gymnastics coaches aren't counted. I don't believe that for a second.
Yeah.
But why aren't they?
Right.
Because they are in positions of authority. I mean, like here, T-ball coaches are mandatory reporters in Pennsylvania.
Right.
So what? Like, if you are in a relationship with a child and you are not their biological relative, you are a mandatory reporter.
To my understanding, yeah.
Yeah. But so I'm not going to say women are the panacea of goodness.
Right.
But I do think it was really important in this case that the investigator who picked up the phone when Rachel Den-Hollander called Michigan State and the Attorney General of Michigan who took the case were both women. I believe
that as well.
And then the judge who presided over Nassar's trial
was a woman.
Was also a woman. Because one of the things that happened that the Attorney General pushed for that I am not entirely sure many people would have was that in any plea deal that Nassar took, he had to agree to hear victim impact statements.
Yeah.
One of my favorite tidbits from the trial that they didn't put in the documentary for reasons I'm not sure about is that about a day into it, he asked the judge to stop the victim impact statements because it was too hard for him to hear.
Uh-huh.
And she, in a very legal, professional way, told him to go screw himself.
Yeah.
And he sat there and listened to, I think, about 100 women?
I think it was over 100, yeah. Slightly over 100, yeah.
A couple of my favorites, Allie Reisman's was fire.
Allie Reisman's was amazing. Rachel
Gabby Douglas's was gorgeous, and then Rachel went last.
Yeah.
And this is a Rachel Den-Hollander Stan account.
Stan account. We are huge fans.
We would, I think if I met her, I would cry.
Oh, I would 100%.
I just want all the best things for her.
In life, yeah.
She would like to be her friend.
Like the emotional fortitude that it took any of them to do this. But that and the way that she methodically prepared, because to the best of our knowledge, she was either a lawyer or studying to be a lawyer or interested in the law. I'm not sure which at the time. I think she is a lawyer, and I think she was at the time. And she understood the system and how it was built in some ways to work against victims and survivors. And so she prepared, and the emotional strength that it took to do that, given what she had experienced, I do not know how she found. But yeah, that for me, I was like, I remember being blown away when she was on Good Morning America talking about it. And I remember being blown away during the trial. And then in this documentary, I was just like, I would bow down in front of her when I saw her, I think, and then hug her.
What it also, I mean, like, there's a lot more to talk about And we could keep going, to be honest, because this is a really rich story. But more than anything, it reminded me that we need to listen well.
Yeah.
And that we need to, even when we are in charge of companies and in charge of, and we've learned this with Me Too and some other things, if we are in charge of people, we also in charge of their physical and emotional safety.
Yeah.
And someone's reputation is not more important than someone's safety, and even when it feels that way.
Yeah. And I think for me, one of the really, really big lessons that I took from this that I'll finish on for me is that, like, it's also the public's job to be critical of institutions and to hold them accountable, because it caused a lot of reflection in me to think about how I viewed Olympians and how I viewed these human beings and thought about them as an American. And there's a section of the documentary that they talk about, like, America loves a winner, right? And that's a huge part of our culture, being the best, being number one at things. But none of us wanted to consider, understandably, that we were willing to sacrifice children to do that. But we did. And, like, collectively, I think we're guilty for it? No. But, like, it was a good reminder to me that, like, A, I'm susceptible to narratives like that, and B, it's all of our jobs to be critical of them and to look, especially when any human is involved, but especially children, how are they being treated? And is this what we want to say about our country or our institution or our church, or, pick a group?
So with all those questions bombing around our brains, we'd be interested to know if you watched Athlete A. We recommend this wholeheartedly,
100%.
Without any reservations. I would also say in my hero category, Maggie Nichols is up there, and I'm really, really glad that she is, I believe at this point now, the defending NCAA all-around gymnastics champion.
Two-time defending.
2 times in a row, at least.
From the University
of Oklahoma Sooners.
Fire.
Yeah. So I want to meet everybody in this documentary, figuring out a way to do that and not be creepy. And so while we do that, we'd encourage.
We keep working on that. Yeah.
And let us know what you think in the comments. And we'll see you in the next Hottish Take.
Bye.
Bye.